Good morning, man. Changed my schedule just a little bit. It's kind of messing me up. It's like I only changed my schedule like by 15 minutes, and you just get in these patterns. And then I changed where I was parking for a couple different reasons, and even parking a different spot when I go to work is throwing me off. Such creatures of habit. Like so much of our behaviors become habitual and instinctual. What is this guy going to do? All right. And the theory behind that is the more you could rely on habits, the more you could free up brain space for higher functioning. Like that would be the reason for it, but like what it ends up being is like so much of your life ends up becoming just habitual, and not only do you make less decisions, but any changes become major. Like a minor change becomes major, like parking in a different parking space or leaving the house 15 minutes earlier. Man. But actually what I was thinking about this morning was last night someone said something about like how disconnected they feel and how unconnected they feel and how they don't seem to fit here, there, or anywhere. And they're like, like what's wrong with me? Is there a way to fix it? And I wrote, actually they want to know like, is this who I am? And I'm like, I don't think that this is who you are, or you wouldn't be asking the question. Like I think that what sounds like that you've been taught to be all these different things, and like you've been given examples of a kind of way to live a life, or a kind of person to be, or you should act like this because you're this age, or you should act like this because you're this gender, or you should act like this because of whatever. And then you try to meet all these goals and expectations and inner ideas of identity, and you end up like creating like this outer shell of who you think you should be, and then you're not comfortable and or happy because it doesn't match what would happen, what you would be doing if you were like completely just allowed to be who you are. And not that there's like a who you are like already in place, already constructed and put together and just ready to be like unearthed, like a buried tomb of a pharaoh. And he's just gonna come out flowing robes and all that stuff, but more like a seed that buried too deep, and it needs to be a little bit closer to the surface, and then it needs time to grow in like gentle conditions to form into whatever it's going to grow into its closest, ideal. And so this person really liked what I wrote, and I was thinking about that. And then someone else said like, well, like, so I said like at one point in time in my life I would have been like visually like been an extrovert, and then I kind of became an introvert, and then I kind of became a recluse, and because of that, I just started like developing my own habits of what like brought me more joy. And even before that though, I did some things that were didn't quite fit who I was at the time, but like fit who I was kind of naturally, like someone with an ability to do something like so far outside of the normal and then do it by themselves. Like so many people, like if they're going to do something outside the normal, like try to find some other people to do it with them, like safety nets and things like that. And I'm just like, oh, I'll just do that by myself. Like the first time I found out that night canoeing was frowned upon by the community, I'm like, God, I've had so much amazing times out there on the water in my canoe in the middle of the night. I get the dangers, I think about the dangers, but like I'm not gonna like I'm not going to not go, or like, well, to try to find other people to go and have these lights, and that just means going less. But I remember this moment in particular because like it was kind of a moment of like confusion and then frustration for me. But like, it's about like, this one person said like, well, how'd you go back to being an extrovert? And I'm like, well, I didn't. Like, and I also didn't try to go back to anything. So there's a moment along the river. I was down there with Aquila, and a log had got stuck by the beach where we normally hang out, and it had caught a bunch of branches. And before I learned to take Aquila's collar off when we go swimming, because sticks would get caught in there and then you get hooked on things. Or sometimes I'd forget to take his collar off. And I saw all these branches, and I'm like, well, I'd like to get those out of there for A, so it's easier for me to swim around. But then B, I don't want any of those things to get caught on Aquila and not have him be able to swim away. And so at first I started like pushing sticks and branches out of this jam. But then some of the logs were like pretty big, and some of them were floating. And I just thought, like, you know what, maybe, because sometimes other stuff floats down. And like rope and bits of raft parts and all these things, and like, well, maybe I can make something, you know, like maybe I could make a raft and then float down to the Columbia on it. And so I started pulling some logs out, knocking other logs out, and I think there was like a half a raft, like it got punctured, but there was still a bit of a raft that had like these cheap ones that still had like some inner tube left in them. And I grab one of those, and I take a moment to, you know, catch my breath and stuff like that and dry off in the sun. And I look up, and there's this half ring of people on the opposite shore, all standing there just staring at me, like just like individuals and groups. And I stop and just look at everyone. Everyone's just looking at me, like they're like, all right, go back to doing. We want to see what happens. We want to see where this goes. And so it's like these two different feelings. One was like, why aren't you guys doing something? You know, like, why are you watching me do something? You know, like, why is what I'm doing more interesting than you know, anything that you could think to do? But then the other part of me was like thinking like, I'm so glad that I got so detached from what other people are doing, or how do other people spend time here at this beach? What do other people do? And you know, how best can I fit in, and all that. Like, I'm so glad I got so far away from that I was completely unconscious of the fact that I started to do one thing, switch to another, and that it would be interesting, you know, for like a lot of people, evidently. Like, so like the idea of like, you know, like you're an introvert or an extrovert or whatever, like for me it's like the farther you get away from thinking about yourself as anything, and the more time you give yourself to like just develop your own interests, and like apart from, is this going to be interesting for others, or is this what other people do, or how do other people do it? Like I remember sewing a kimono out of some material I found. And it was like this big sheet, and I stood up and was kind of like dancing around, not dancing, but I was like moving around in like big steps around the sewing machine to keep up with the speed of the needle and run the fabric through. And one of the people I was with, like, they're like, no, you sit down. And I'm like, well, I'm doing this big giant sheet and I gotta stand up. They're like, no, you just run it through slowly, and I'm like, why? I'm still sewing it. They're like, well, look how you get away from the edge. And then I picked up their project, and I'm like, well, you can see how you got away from the edge right here too. They're like, oh yeah, but it was just a little bit. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter. Like you're trying to get me to do things the way you do it, and then you have reasons, say like, because you could avoid this, but you can't avoid that. And then you could say like, well, I avoided it a little and you haven't avoided it as much. It's like, it's still something that's happening. And overall, what's most important is, very quickly, I'm going to have a kimono. For whatever reason, and but it disturbed them that I wasn't sitting at a sewing machine the way they were taught to sit. I was doing something I was doing the same thing they were doing, but so differently. And once again, it caught everyone's attention. Everyone was watching me sew a kimono when everyone had their own projects, but they all just stopped to watch me. And I wasn't doing it to, gain attention, for God's sakes. I assure you of that. Because it always slightly bothers me when all of a sudden I start getting a lot of attention. And not because it makes me self-conscious. It does a little bit. But mostly I just kind of wonder, I'm like, why isn't the project you're working on as captivating? I get it if you're like, I like that technique and I want to learn it. That makes sense. So if other people watching me build that raft across the river suddenly start building their own raft, I'm like, oh, okay, as an inspiration, I appreciate that. Someone's dumped a piano along the road. God, there was something else. I don't know. I can't think of it. I think that as I start getting through this area, there's cleanup crews and homeless camps and everything like that. Just tends to throw me off my stride.